Yes, sir. What's your name and what's your question?
My name is Bob Gervin, and I'd like to ask a question about intellectual property. If we have an American company that has granted patents in China, what's your perspective on the landscape with those? How enforceable, important, what's your current assessment of that landscape?
Okay. Who would like to take that one? Intellectual
Well,
property
talk
in
on
China.
a cultural perspective. I think the intellectual property thing has sort of become a, what's that? Red herring, yeah. It's it's cultural. There again, so much of this for me just goes back to culture. It's about the relationship. If you have a good relationship and if you understand what you should not do, I mean, honestly, I always say that Americans are like little puppy dogs. You know, we just go someplace and we're just wagging our tail and we want to lick everybody. It's like, it's like we just are very open to possibilities to have problems because we're not like the Chinese, vigilant. The Chinese are extremely vigilant. There's an expression in Chinese, 害人之心不可有，防人之心不可无. That is also an aspect of yin yang. There's the positive and there's the negative. There's the fact that you should not make yourself available to be taken advantage of, but you should also not be a person who takes advantage of others. In Confucianism, Confucius saw this aspect of his culture, which is still very much the culture of today in China, and that's the aspect that there are respectable people and there are scoundrels. And you got to figure out if the person that you're working with is respectable or a scoundrel. And if it's a scoundrel, the Chinese know you shouldn't trust them. But how do the Americans figure that out? That's the challenge. How do I know that this person that I'm interacting with is trustworthy? The Chinese are very trustworthy, but the Chinese will also tell you, don't just go out and make friends with anybody because you don't know who they are. The Chinese are relationship oriented. They get to know each other over years. Their best friends are people they grew up with and went to school with. Those are the people they trust. They don't trust somebody they just met yesterday and started interacting with. They will put them on hold and they'll just work through the relationship. We need to learn how to do that. Going back on the trade war situation too, the Chinese can wait. The Chinese will say, if I can't get revenge, I'll have my grandkids do it for me. It's a whole different world. And if we're approaching it with our very basic, simple, very in a lot of ways simplistic compared to Chinese culture mindset, then we're opening ourselves up for all sorts of potential problems. So I think that it's important to just be vigilant, not afraid.
So going back to the question, is it fair to say that over the last 20 years, intellectual property protection has improved in China? I mean, that's
Yes.
my perception.
Yes.
I think probably in general
Very
it
much so.
has. A couple questions off of that. Number one is when you talk about people who are scoundrels, it's a fairly universal, but do Chinese view people who take patents from other countries as a scoundrel? Chinese people? Is that
That's hard to say yes to because there's so many cultural things going on here that the Chinese, number one, they have an expression that's called ichi. That means that you're going to take care of your friends, all right? Native Americans have blood brother relationships. They sort of do the same thing. You don't know the relationship that's going on there. But the Chinese also believe that people should be good and do what's right. At the same time, so many different stories come out of these situations. We just say, oh, well, they stole it, but maybe the Chinese have a different explanation for it, which may be feasible. So are we able to sit down and work with them and talk through these situations so that we can come to a mutual agreement and we can come to a mutual respect and move forward from that? But at the same time, we don't want to, I always say, when you're meeting with the Chinese, don't just tell them everything that you think. Tell them what they need to know. Don't tell them what you want to tell them. Because Americans are too open. We say too much. We're too willing to tell all sorts of information. And when we do that, these people are very perceptive. They can pull information out of things that you may think there's no information because of their whole cultural makeup.
Okay, very good.
Can I
Yeah.
just add one
yes,
thing to
please.
that? And I'm going to make up a percentage, but it's got to be right around 80% or possibly even higher of joint ventures between American companies and Chinese companies fail. One of the things that I'm sure you and I both work on is helping companies to succeed if they're going into a JV agreement. And one of the things that I do in that situation is work with companies that are based in China, a couple of consulting companies that I work with regularly, who will do that primary research, who will talk to others about reputation, about management style with the JV or the prospective JV company. So there are ways to create a positive environment and a positive business environment, but I agree 100% with what you're saying. We can't do it going in as Americans. I love your analogy of puppy dogs. I'm using
I
that.
want to just add one more thing too. For me, I find that the best way to judge a person's character is through their own language. And so when I'm speaking to a Chinese person in Chinese, I'm seeing a very different person than that person speaking to me in English. And I've experienced that from a man that I was managed by. When I heard him speaking Chinese, I was scared because of the things he was saying and the way he was talking. When I heard him speaking English, he was just like one of the rest of us. But I see that that is who he really is when he's speaking his own language. And that's where we really need to be able to get. If you don't have a person that you're working with who's able to be that person for you, then you need to find them. And you need to question, is a Chinese national the right person to be making that bridge? Because who are they really going to be working for? So it's just like there are aspects of the Chinese culture that, yes, we need to be very aware of and we also need to be careful of. But there's ways to work through it and work around it so that the bite doesn't hurt as bad.